Welcome back to Global Power Talks. Please subscribe to the channel and like the video. Nuke. Today we examine one of the most serious developments emerging from Moscow. Around the world headlines are warning of a deepening Kremlin crisis. A senior Russian military figure has acknowledged major setbacks. Pressure is now building rapidly on President Vladimir Putin. These events have sent shockwaves through Russian leadership and the war in Ukraine. They expose visible cracks in the image of absolute strength and control the Kremlin has long presented. Recent developments have made this pressure impossible to ignore. A top-level Russian military official was killed inside Moscow. At the same time, reports of internal disagreement are quietly spreading. Together, these signs point to growing strain on Putin as the war moves into its fourth year without a clear victory. From the outside, the crisis appears dramatic and undeniable. Snow-covered streets surround the red walls of the Kremlin. For decades, these walls stood as a symbol of Russian power. Now they appear isolated and challenged by unfolding reality. Russian flags still fly above government buildings, yet the capital itself has been shaken by violent incidents. An attack inside Moscow claimed the life of Lieutenant General Fanel Serverov. Smoke rose from damaged vehicles. Emergency teams moved quickly into action. Investigators showed serious and tense expressions. One message became clear. The war is no longer distant. It has reached the center of Russia. In Ukraine, frozen terrain stretches across Donetsk and Kharkiv regions. Russian convoys move slowly through ice and mud. Tanks marked with the Russian tricolor advance with difficulty or stall under resistance. Ukrainian steppes and forests provide natural cover. Russian positions in occupied areas such as Pakhovsk are defined by trenches and artillery under constant pressure. Along the Black Sea coast and across Crimea, the landscape reflects high strategic value, yet continued strikes show an empire under stress, struggling to maintain control against relentless force. Now we move deeper into the heart of this unfolding crisis, because the real turmoil is not only visible on the streets, it is building behind the thick walls of the Kremlin. Inside the Kremlin, grand halls with golden ceilings and historic portraits now host tense meetings. President Putin listens as his top military leaders deliver briefings. These briefings describe progress and momentum, but recent revelations suggest a different reality. Sources indicate that senior commanders, including the chief of the general staff, Valery Gerasimov, have presented overly positive reports. Ukrainian casualties were inflated, Russian advances were exaggerated, setbacks were minimized. This created a picture of success that masked a grinding stalemate on the battlefield. Putin sits at long tables in ornate rooms surrounded by imperial symbols and state emblems. He believes Russia is moving steadily toward victory, yet people close to the leadership describe growing frustration among insiders. They warn the war is becoming a heavy burden on the economy and society. This internal pressure intensified after the killing of Lieutenant General Fanel Serverov, a key figure in combat training. His death inside Moscow exposed serious security weaknesses. Putin was informed immediately. The Kremlin accused Ukrainian services, but the incident showed how operations or dissent could penetrate the core of power. Even hardline voices have begun to shift. Hi, and war try verbal for enough for sift. Voices. Figures like Sergei Karaganov and Dmitry Rogozin have quietly admitted that a decisive victory like that of 1945 is impossible. They acknowledge stalemates and enormous costs for limited gains, yet they still argue for endurance rather than compromise. Inside military command centers, maps of Ukraine tell a harsher story. Slow movement around areas like Pakhovsk and Syrsk. High losses for minimal progress. Offices review drone footage, satellite images, and reports. Many of these contradict the optimistic briefings delivered to Putin. The gap between reality and the strain is not limited to leadership and command rooms. It is spreading across Russian society itself. Families are receiving notices of fallen soldiers. Reservists are being called up through quiet and classified orders. Economic advisors are raising alarms in private meetings. They warn about rising inflation, sanctions cutting deeper into daily life, and the need to slow growth to avoid long-term collapse. In occupied regions, policies aimed at boosting birth rates reveal deep demographic anxiety. Population decline is becoming a strategic concern. Losses on the battlefield are accelerating this pressure. Inside Russia, the security services are tightening their grip. The FSB is expanding surveillance. Any hint of dissent is quickly monitored and suppressed. Public unity is enforced while private frustration grows. Inside the Kremlin, President Putin continues to reject ceasefire proposals. He doubles down on maximalist objectives, demilitarization, control over annexed territories, and refusal to compromise. Yet reality keeps pushing back. Assassinations expose vulnerabilities. Fellic reports are increasingly questioned. And allies like Belarus are drawn deeper into the conflict by hosting new missile systems and deterrence measures. Konrot, what was once a fortress of unified resolve now feels tense and divided. Elite loyalty shows signs of strain. Economic warnings grow louder. Military realism clashes with official narratives. Peace talks flicker with outside involvement, including the United States. But Russia continues to reject meaningful concessions. This stance deepens isolation. The internal atmosphere is heavy. A leadership bubble built on optimism and attrition strategy shows signs of cracking, and the cost of maintaining that illusion keeps rising. When it comes to battlefield performance, the picture is mixed. There are moments of persistence and adaptation, but they are overshadowed by inefficiency and heavy cost. Russian forces have made small advances in Donetsk. They push toward key hubs using heavy artillery, drone swarms, and glide bombs. Electronic warfare has been used more effectively, showing some ability to adapt under pressure. In occupied territories such as Crimea, defensive performance remains solid. Layered air defenses, naval presence, and fortified positions continue to hold. Yet, overall momentum remains slow. Territory is gained in meters and kilometers over months. The human cost is immense. Casualties continue to rise into the tens of thousands. Ukrainian counterattacks have reclaimed ground in areas like Kupiansk. These actions expose Russian overreach and stretch supply lines. Logistics and deep strike capability show clear strain. Supply routes are vulnerable. Manpower relies heavily on convicts, mercenaries, and foreign recruits. The targeting and killing of senior officers highlights failures in counterintelligence. Security weaknesses inside Russia itself are now undeniable. Putin's direct involvement in military briefings points to micromanagement, but inflated performance reports distort decision-making. This disconnect leads to strategic miscalculations at the highest level. Safety and protection around the Kremlin and military leadership are now under serious question. 10. Despite heavy FSB presence, armed guards, and widespread surveillance in Moscow, multiple senior officers have been killed this year. This reveals failures in vehicle screening, route protection, and threat detection. Russia continues to rely on its ultimate deterrence. Nuclear doctrine, missile deployments, and strategic systems moved to Belarus for regional coverage. These measures are presented as safeguards against escalation. Air defense systems over key sites perform reasonably well against aerial threats. But ground-level attacks expose major gaps in personal security for high-ranking officials. Sanctions have limited access to advanced technology. This weakens long-term modernization and safety upgrades. Now, the Kremlin continues to promote its core narrative: resilience, historical endurance, and survival through sheer will and resources. Russia is framed as a great power capable of outlasting any opponent. Putin emphasizes economic stability despite sanctions. Claims of controlled inflation and state support for the war effort are repeated. Now, territorial annexations and rejection of Western's influence remain central themes. They appeal to nationalist audiences, and present the war as an existential defense against NATO expansion. The price of this prolonged crisis is enormous. Military spending has reached historic levels. Economic growth has slowed. Interest rates remain high. Brain drain continues. And demographic decline accelerates. Human losses are severe. Casualty estimates reach into the hundreds of thousands. Economic isolation raises prices. Frozen assets abroad add financing. In the end, this Kremlin crisis, driven by leadership losses, internal admissions, and growing pressure on Putin, may mark a turning point. Outward resilience hides deep internal erosion. The war shows no sign of quick resolution. Putin continues to double down even as talks appear and fade. Stay tuned for more updates as this story continues to evolve. Thanks for watching Global Power Talks. Do not forget to subscribe and like for more in-depth coverage.